About 2 years ago, I had the pleasure of exploring a game called Song for War Mediterranean Theater that was coming to Kickstarter. Now, this was a strategic, operational level 2 to 4 player game about the Mediterranean theater in World War II, designed for easy access and playability, and yet with a lot of subtlety and depth to the sequence of play and the way you could use units and the unit characteristics. Unfortunately, that game didn't make its Kickstarter. I thought that was the end of it, but fast forward to today, and I'm incredibly excited because the game is coming back for round 2. The developers of the game at Invicta Rex took all of the feedback and comments and thoughts that they heard about the previous Kickstarter, revamped a lot of the composition of the game and some of the gameplay, added 2 more scenarios to the game, created a couple of options for the Kickstarter. So it's basically a reworking and re-envisioning of the game while keeping true to the spirit of the original that addresses the concerns that people had in the first Kickstarter. It's coming back to Kickstarter in early 2025. In this video, we're going to do an overview of the game and talk about some of the changes between the last version and this version. Let's jump in and get started. Before we jump in and take a look at the components in detail, let's do a big picture view of what we've got. What we're looking at right now is one of the new scenarios added to the game. This is the North Africa scenario. It plays on this 27-inch by 31-inch map of the North African desert. Now, in the previous Kickstarter, there was one 54-inch by 31-inch map. Here's what it looked like right here. And there were 2 scenarios. Now, these scenarios took quite a while to play, 4 to 6 hours. And some of the feedback from the earlier Kickstarter was it'd be nice to have a couple of options that didn't take so long to play and didn't have as big a footprint. So hence, we've got this North Africa scenario. And in addition to the North Africa scenario, there's also an Italy scenario that uses another 27-inch by 31-inch map. Now, these scenarios, in addition to having the same core mechanics, have also added a couple of mechanics. For example, the Italian scenario has some hidden deployment, and this North Africa scenario has supply lines and mobile supply hubs to represent kind of the dynamic supply nature of the North African campaign. In the upcoming Kickstarter, you have 2 options. You can get the North Africa scenario here together with the Italian scenario, or you can get the bigger package that has all 4 scenarios in it, including, of course, the 2 Mediterranean theater scenarios on that 54-inch by 31-inch big map. In addition to the 2 new scenarios, there's been a lot of continued playtesting and refinement of gameplay. Some of the elements and some of the cards and things have been redesigned a little bit, and we'll take a look at those as we dig in more into the games here. And with that being said, let's jump in now and take a look at some of the components in the game. What we're looking at right now are the allied unit trays, and there are over 400 units in the game. A quick disclaimer, this is still in the prototype stage, so the final composition of units and what they look like and the art may change between what we're looking at right now in the final production version. That goes for everything in the game. Now, there are over 400 units, tiled units in the game, representing a variety of air, sea, and land forces in the game. Let's take a deeper look now at the units and talk a little bit about how they impact gameplay. First up, there's a great variety. So this is not comprehensive, but we can see anti-aircraft units, transports, destroyers, artillery, light bombers, ground transport. We've got some infantry over here. In addition to this, we've got heavy bombers and cruisers and battleships and aircraft carriers and submarines. A pretty broad palette here of unit design. Each side also has a unique unit. Here is the B-17 for the US and this Alpine infantry for the Italian forces. The units bring up a couple of aspects about gameplay. When I made some previous videos about the game, people said, wow, it looks like Axis and Allies. There is some visual comparison, perhaps, in terms of the style of units, but the gameplay here is much deeper and much richer than Axis and Allies. Nothing against Axis and Allies. This is just a more subtle, more involved, and a deeper game. But while we are looking at the units, it is important to note that all of these units function in very unique ways. They have unique movement capacities, they have unique armor ratings, they have unique hit power and hit ratings, and then almost every unit has a unique skill or function within the game. Put it all together and you get a very unique air, sea, and land combined arms effect in the game. Having said that, an artillery unit for the Italians, for example, is going to function the same way an artillery unit functions for the Germans, and likewise, armored for British forces is going to function the same way as armor for German forces. With the caveat that in the Mediterranean theater, there are ways to spend national support currencies to give these units unique functions for their own nationalities. All of that adds up to a game where we've got a historical foundation for what's happening inside the gameplay, but I wouldn't call this a historical simulation. This is a game that focuses on gameplay, focuses on creativity and tactics and strategy, and isn't really tying you to the actual history or the way these conflicts played out. And nowhere, I think, is the uniqueness of gameplay better stated within this player aid that we're looking at. And there is one for each of the 4 powers. We're looking at the German standard units one right now. On the left-hand side, we can see all of the elements and strengths and factors and information about the units in the game. The right-hand side is the sequence of play. Let's take a moment just to talk about both of these because they're very important, I think, for understanding how the game works. So the left-hand side here has the air, sea, and land units capabilities. This is the column for movement, so it talks about what the movement ratings are for all of the different units. And again, this is the same for every nation. So fighters for the Germans are going to function as fighters for the Allies, for the US and the British forces, until you get to those unique units that come into play. This is the armor rating, so what it takes to destroy a unit like this. This is the hit power that it has added, so it needs a 7 to hit, and it does a white level of damage. There's different levels of damage that units do, and these are the characteristics, the special characteristics of all the units. Over here, we can see on the right-hand side, this is the cost and supply factors to rebuild a unit during the supply phase. So every unit's got a lot of different things going on. Learning how the unit functions is probably the most complex aspect of the game. Overall, I'd probably give this game a complexity of a 3, though. It's really not complex, and you've got all of the information right here. Once you understand the basic gameplay elements, you pretty much use this as a reference all the time and you're good to go. Let's talk a little bit though about the right-hand side, which is the sequence of play. It's divided up into 2 parts. We've got the movement part, the movement sequence, and then the combat sequence. And I'm going to make another video that will show pieces of this in action. But basically what happens at the beginning of a turn, you're going to move everything that has this. So the first part of the movement in a turn is going to be, for example, the Allied forces moving all their fighters and their submarines. Then if there are any fighters and submarines that have generated combat, you walk through these battle steps. And this is the order that the units that are engaged with combat fight. So the anti-aircraft's going to fire first, fighters are next, light bombers and heavy bombers go next, destroyers and submarines, and so on and so forth, through any any area that there is combat involved with. Once you've done all that, you go to the second player, which is going to alternate. It could be the Axis or the Allies, depending on which turn it is and which part of the turn. Then they're going to move their fighters and the submarines. Then you're going to go back to the first player in the turn. They're going to move all of these air units, moving the fighters again, moving destroyers and the ship transports. Their mines are actually in here as well. And this is going to go through any combat that's generated by that. We'll walk through all the combat steps. So a scenario like this North Africa scenario is 5 turns, but each turn is a very involved process where you're going through in 6 different stages here until you get to the end of it. So a turn is big, a lot happens, and this is a fast-moving game where the action really cranks up fast. This is a great player aid, though, I think, for using it for understanding the sequence of play and also quickly referencing what units do what and how they can perform in combat and in action. On the other side, too, we have an explanation of all of the unit abilities. So this talks about what each one of those symbols mean on the units, and this is the setup information. And keep in mind, again, this is a prototype version. The final version of this will likely look a lot different. Let's talk now about the unique aspects and these unique cards that come into play in the Mediterranean theater version. So this aspect of gameplay isn't in the North Africa scenario or the Italy scenario. It's only in the big Mediterranean theater scenarios. And this is where we have a set of about 60 cards that represent unique events, unique units, and unique capabilities that are asymmetrical that each side in the game can develop. And what we're looking at right now are some of the US and British and German capacities. And basically we talked about how an infantry unit for the Italians is the same as an infantry unit for the Germans, but with this system here, this is how you distinguish them. At the end of each turn in the Mediterranean theater version, you're going to get 2 of these national support tokens, and we can see that right here there's a cost on each of these cards. For example, this cost 2 national support tokens to purchase. And what you do at the end of the turn is you spend these national support tokens to pick a very small subset that you're given in each game out of these cards. And by the way, these cards have all been redesigned with a different look. So these are most definitely a prototype version. I should mention that. So for example, here, if you were to spend the 2 national support tokens on the US infantry, you're going to punch them up to a level that they hit at a gray level of attack, which is higher and harder, basically because they've developed the bazooka, they can do more damage, and it would cost you 2 of these national support tokens. Here is a US Ranger class aircraft carrier, a German Junkers dive bomber, and a Matilda tank for the British. In addition to units, some of these cards provide unique capabilities and unique actions to your entire side. For example, Bomb Alley allows the Axis bombers to use their tactical bombers in a strategic way. This is an uprising in Naples of pro-Allied resistance that's going to put a force in there. This is counterintelligence that allows you to move some of the Italian units around supply lines, giving the US forces a greater amount of supply in a particular turn. So there's a lot of different unique ways that these units are going to influence a game, and they can in turn influence your strategy. For example, if you get Matilda tanks as the British, you probably want to start building more Matilda tanks and resupplying with more Matilda tanks. So it's going to give you a greater strength with that force and perhaps lead to some of your strategy going down that line. It's really a neat way to bring a lot of asymmetry to a game, and also because you're only going to see a very limited set of these in any one game, it creates a lot of replayability as well, because every game in that Mediterranean theater is going to play out different depending upon what units you're given to pick from, and what special cards and abilities you're given to pick from, and which ones you finally decide on. So what we're looking at right now are the victory point tiles. Basically every scenario has a number of objectives that each side is fighting over. We can see their values up in the top left here of these different tiles. And when an objective changes sides, it represents a transfer of victory points that go with it, and you track that as you're playing the game. When a side gets to a certain victory point total, it can trigger an automatic win. So scenarios don't necessarily go their first turn length, but basically this is what you're tracking in terms of objectives. So you're looking to gain these objectives with your combined operations and try to tilt the nature of battle to your side so you can end the conflict and win. I want to talk briefly about hidden fleets and how they impact gameplay. Also, a little bit of a connection with these to solitaire play. So one interesting feature of the game is that most scenarios start with one of the 4 powers or more having a hidden fleet. Here is the German hidden fleet, basically resupplies for North Africa as you start that North Africa campaign. And this service tile here, this designates that it's in the hex, the area J7, and this is the units that are there. So the German player is keeping these off the map and just designating as they are moving their fleet where the actual location of the fleet is. Now there are mechanics for discovering the location of a fleet and for when you can break up a location of the fleet and how it works when you reveal it. But one of the big elements of gameplay is trying to guess and figure out where your opponent's hidden fleets may be, and likewise they're trying to do the same thing to you, especially in the Mediterranean theater game where you're not really sure where the Allies are going to land. Are they going to go up perhaps through Greece? Are they going to come up through the boot of Italy? Are they going to go through Sicily? It's a lot of mystery. And so as the Axis player, that hidden game behind the game of where is the Allied fleet, the Axis also have a hidden fleet that can counteract that. So there's a little bit of subterfuge and mystery going on in the game. Now, obviously, if you think about that, that's the trickiest thing for solitaire play. That's the one thing that's really not going to work all that well in a solitaire environment. Even playing both sides, you're going to kind of know where they are. Now, I know there are being some rules and considerations, guidelines being written, perhaps is the best way to describe them, for solitaire play. I haven't seen those yet, so that'll be interesting to see if they're coming up with a mechanic that might kind of allow you to bring this hidden fleet aspect of gameplay into a solitaire play. The only other place where I would see solitaire impacting it is in that Italian scenario where you've got some hidden fleets landing for the Allies and you've got some hidden deployment for the Axis forces. So that one, I'm curious to see how solitaire might work for that. At the moment, I'd probably give this game a 6. I think it works really well with the loss of the hidden fleet aspect. Should also be mentioned, the game comes with a bucket of dice, white, gray, and black, designating the strength of the units that are firing. In combat, very simply, I'll show this in the next video, but you're rolling to hit, and the number of hits you get equals to a certain degree, the amount of damage and units that you're going to be able to take out on the enemy side. So it's a rather quick resolving combat system based on the firepowers and the armor ratings and the types of units that are involved. It works really elegantly. It allows you to get through combat in a way that represents both the strengths of the units and doesn't bog down the game. And lastly, the maps. These are absolutely gorgeous. They're all with thick, high-quality mounting. And again, these are prototypes. So some of the designs, I know in particular, there's some rethought being given to some of the designations for the North Africa scenario. So these are not final versions, but in terms of the types of art that we're going to expect, I think, in the final version of the game, these are absolutely stellar. I mean, they just pull you right into the gameplay. I know, talking often, like, what are the most beautiful maps in war games? This is right up there with me. I just absolutely love the design, the color palettes of these, the way it kind of evokes the nature of the terrain here, kind of the lighter, the desert nearby the water, the thicker, drier desert in here. Just absolutely stunning maps and beautiful color palette here. I love how they look. And here we are looking at the Italian map. We can see this is for that kind of secretive deployment up here for the German forces. But again, we get the mountains running down the spine of Italy. The terrain's just absolutely beautiful stuff. I love the way these look. And with that, we've looked at all the components of the game and talked about gameplay. I'm going to be creating a short gameplay video. I'll put a link to it as soon as it's ready. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.